Hi everybody. Week 7 in criminal courts, and we're going to talk about defense counsel. I think you're going to see a rise in TV and movies celebrating defense counsel as we move towards, or at least certain segments of society move towards a due process model. You know, in the past, Special Victims Unit and many other TV shows were around the prosecutorial function, but I'm just going to suggest that is going to swing. Back to one. When I was younger, it was TV was almost always about defense counsel, and it really portrayed ineptness in the police. Really portrayed the corrupt, nature, whether it be, actual, monetary or political, or personal corruption or noble cause corruption. But that was, you saw that a lot. So, defense counsel this week. Your biggest problem with being a defense attorney is getting people to pay you. It's not an easy way to figure out how to do things. Once you get out of law school, go out, you can, as they say, hang up your shingle and start looking for clients. And then you go from there. Understand though, law school doesn't teach you much about trials. It teaches you basically how to pass the bar and how to think. And that ability to critically think about something even though you don't necessarily believe it. It's a very difficult thing. Look at your fellow students' posts in discussion boards, and it's really difficult for them to open up and be able to argue an opposite point of view. Just because they haven't learned how or haven't trained themselves to think about another person's arguments and then figure out whether or not they like the argument or not. With this week, we will be talking about a lot in this chapter about right to counsel. And I mean, absolutely huge issue. When the Constitution was written and envisioned, with the Sixth Amendment, it wasn't that everybody had the right to have an attorney, and certainly not an attorney provided by the government. You could have an attorney if you brought one with you when you went to court, but that was it. It didn't matter the charges, it didn't matter the potential penalties. If you could afford an attorney, it was all good. And that was the way it was for a long, long time, up until the 60s with Gideon versus Wainwright, and a landmark case when it comes to Sixth Amendment. The book talks about Gideon versus Wainwright. They'll talk about juveniles with N. Ray Gault. Then there's a series of cases for non-felony prosecutions. So make sure that you have an idea on those, because if you see the cases, you're likely to see those cases or the concepts tested in the exams. So there's a pretty good little chart in there about when the right to counsel and felony prosecution, when it's required, and when it's not required. And they talk about a critical stage. A critical stage is a stage where you've got to start answering questions, to a judge. How do you plead? Do you understand? You have rights to this, rights to that. Those are critical stages. So really good chart. The authors did a nice job on that. So what happens if you get a crummy attorney? You get me. No, I don't. Well, Sorry. Well, there are some protections from the courts. First one, and the one that I really want to make sure you understand, is the idea that was counsel so bad that it affected the process? Was counsel so bad that it resulted in an unfair outcome? That's the standard from Strickland versus Washington, two-part test. And you see that argued frequently when it comes to cases that get into the higher levels of the court system. And it's kind of hard on on the trial guys doing the trials, because their ability is immediately called into question and put up against that Strickland standard. It doesn't often result in conviction being overturned, but as a person being in law enforcement that spent years and years and years and years being criticized by other people for everything I did, it's got to get to them after a while. So the idea of self-representation, there's several cases there that talk about that, so make sure that you understand that. Now, getting to the goal of a defense attorney. The goal of a defense attorney is to get the best outcome possible for their client. But they're within parameters. One, the client gets to make decisions. So let's say a person's arrested for a violent felony, and during the process, the court process after arrest, there's a pretrial conference, and they discuss a plea. And the defendant does not want to plea. They want to make sure that that everything's going to be done the way it needs to be done. Well, even if the attorney's got bad facts, even if the attorney's got bad law, even if the attorney's got a bad judge and a tough prosecutor, the attorney has to proceed with that. And then deal with the potential trial penalty. But make sure, of course, the client understands that and is well counseled in that idea and that concept, because that will come up later in an appeal with a Strickland issue, guaranteed. And oftentimes, what's really good for a client is a plea. And that could be a really good outcome for a client. On the other hand, going to trial, people think that not guilty defines winning. Yes, you get a not guilty verdict and it's great. However, a hung jury is also good, because that gives the prosecution more incentive to come back with a better plea bargain, or to decide to drop charges completely, drop charges entirely. So understand that an NG, not guilty, is one thing that attorneys strive for, but also a hung jury, get one person. So rule of one is saying in with defense is just get one jury to believe your presentation, and you've gained a victory in that. So as you look through the book, I think they paint kind of a dark picture of defense counsel. Certainly there's defense counsel that doesn't do well economically, but it could be because they don't know how to run a business. They have trouble getting clients, because getting paid is one thing, getting clients is another thing that you have to do as counsel. And if you just wait for somebody to walk through your door, you might not get the amount of business you need. When you look at the counsel that's provided, there's several different ways to do that. You know, and here's my experience. You know, I know a ton of attorneys, and many of them are unhappy with what they're doing. They would like to be doing something else, but maybe the money's too good, they've been doing it too long, they don't know what other thing they would get into. But then there's a group of attorneys that are pretty happy, and those are public defenders and prosecutors. And for the most part, they're happier because they think that they're doing something good. And they may not have been doing something good in a different part of the law. So I think there's, you know, that portion of it. I know when I started doing some work in that area, you know, the hard part was getting clients and you know, getting out there and, you know, and doing stuff. So it can be taxing, especially that idea of finding clients. Take a look at the different ways that counsel is obtained for a person. The assignment system, the contract system, public defender system, all very important. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to try to be a little bit brief this week. I wasn't in 302. If you were in 302 and you sat through that, I'm sorry, but it was all stuff that I had to talk about, and I apologize. So with this, make sure that you spend the time with making good notes. You've seen how the exam is written, and then go from there. Okay? That being said,